Nagawa, he replied, her voice barely rising above the quiet hum of the train. Yokohama's neon sprawl blurred past the windows, a cascade of colors streaming over the glass to merge with her tired face staring back at her. The old man across the aisle leaned forward, his eyes buried under brows like worn leather, his skin the color of smoked tea. Long commute? Yes. The first 30 miles were the worst. I still remember the first time he came to me. He moaned like bits back on the land. Yuki gave a non-committal shrug, her headphones already halfway over her ears. The man took no notice. "I'm going to Hamamatsu. The 5 temples," he said, his eyes unfocused, drifting somewhere beyond the window. "It's a good place to clear the mind." Yuki pulled her headphones entirely over her ears. "New job," she muttered, though she cared less if the old man couldn't hear her. "Can't afford to live in Tokyo." He wore a ratty, camouflaged flak jacket. He smelled like fish. Half his teeth were missing. Old people are terrifying. Train stations. He paused, scratching at the stubble on his neck. Where we all go to find our way home. Hundreds of people passing through. Thousands every day, all trying to get back to where they belong. His expression waxed nostalgic. Returning to their husbands and children. He turned his head toward Yuki. Mothers and fathers. Yuki shifted uncomfortably. Struggling to maintain a polite demeanor, Yuki forced a half smile and pushed aside her green hair. She was exhausted. Work weighed on her. She had hoped to sleep, not be accosted by some creep. The bullet train rushed through a clanging intersection, horns blaring. Bright white and neon red spilled in from the window, causing Yuki's shadow to climb into the vacant chair beside her before sliding across the ceiling. The train jolted suddenly, the overhead lights flickering, casting his wizened face in sharp, uneven shadows. The old man leaned closer, his gaze fixed on her reflection, appearing in the window as if he spoke directly to her. "What would you do?" "Hana," Yuki lied. "Hana, if you couldn't get home." "By train? I'd call a rideshare, I guess." He gave a slow, rattling chuckle. "Convenient, yes," he murmured, looking past her reflection out the window. "But what if you had no cellular telephone?" Yuki's mouth went dry. She didn't know why his words bothered her, but they slid under her skin, leaving her uneasy. Yuki slowly lifted her backpack from under her chair. She gripped its straps. A cold sweat ran down the back of her neck. Her throat tightened, and her pulse thrummed heavy in her ears. "Why'd I sit so far back, so isolated?" "I'd ask for help," Yuki said. "Yes," he said, leaning towards a seat in the row before her and pressing his thumb alongside its headrest. He glanced at her expectantly, cocking his brows. Yuki swallowed, hugging her backpack closer. His odd expression dragged her further from any sense of comfort. Smelling her backpack, memories of university barged in, bittersweet, tinged with longing. She thought of Aiko, her best friend from her last year at Waseda. They'd spend afternoons sprawled out on the soft grass near the Shinjuku campus, laughing until their stomachs hurt as they shared the latest gossip or commiserated over exams. Aiko was always the bolder of the two, her laugh loud and infectious, drawing Yuki out of her shell. They had a running joke that Aiko's laugh could be heard across the city. Aiko had loved dragging Yuki out to explore every hidden cafe, bookstore, and record shop she could find. She'd introduced Yuki to an old, cramped ramen shop in Takadanobaba, hidden in a back alley. The place was dimly lit, with mismatched stools and faded 80s posters on the walls. Yuki longed for the taste of the warm, comforting broth they'd slurped down together after long study sessions, savoring the quiet moments between bursts of laughter and chatter. When the job offer in Tokyo came, Yuki immediately called Aiko, excitement bubbling through the phone line. Aiko's initial congratulations had been warm, but there was a pause, a slight dip in her tone when she'd added, "Tokyo's a big place. You'll be busy all the time, right?" At the time, Yuki had brushed it off. She couldn't imagine losing touch, not with a friendship like theirs. She'd promised to visit every month, to keep in touch as though nothing would change. But Tokyo had its own gravity, pulling her deeper and deeper into long hours, draining her days and leaving her evenings blank with exhaustion. Calls became texts, and then only occasional messages. It had been months since she'd heard Aiko's laugh, and she wasn't even sure she'd recognize her voice on the phone anymore. Obligations consumed her now, and her world was reduced to a daily grind. She spent her days in the office, poring over reports, answering calls, and attending endless meetings, each day blending into the next. By the time she got on the train to go home, she barely had the energy to keep her eyes open, let alone reach out to her old friends. The ride alone took well over 3 hours. Aiko's laughter, the smell of ramen, and the sun on her face during those long afternoons felt like echoes from another life. The weight of it pressed down on her, her backpack digging into her arms, as if to remind her of what she'd left behind. The old man seemed to drag those memories into the open, forcing her to confront the hollow ache she'd been carrying. He returned to his chair. "How about this?" His eyes flicked toward her, sharp and knowing. "Have you ever tried to go home, only to find you can't? That the road's no longer there? Why do old people talk in koans?" A prickle of fear settled in her stomach. She forced herself to meet his gaze, feigning calm. "I can always get home." She held up her phone. "I have maps." She sent him a message. He grinned, his taut mouth twisting up into what had once been a famous smile. He gave her a small, sad smile. "You think you know the way, but when you arrive, it's different, and you wonder if it's the road that's changed, or if it's you." More memories flooded her mind. Aiko had texted Yuki last week. "Ever since you got that job, I don't matter anymore. I get it, your priorities have shifted, but stop pretending you're the same Yuki I used to know." The old man's eyes went to the storage bins above her. He rose, running a gnarled thumb over a bin, leaving some unseen mark. The cabin dipped slightly, the train swaying side to side. "What are you doing?" Yuki's whisper barely made it past her lips. He reclined into his chair, sighing as though weary with a heavy truth. "Imagine you're drowning, Hana," he said, almost to himself. "The water fills your lungs and tugs at your legs, but no one is there. And you keep thinking, if only I could hold on just a little longer." Her blood chilled as he spoke, an involuntary shudder rippling down her spine. She wanted to move, to stand up and leave, but she felt anchored to her seat. Her backpack was the only thing she could cling to, a life preserver keeping her afloat. Bending, he unzipped a worn duffel bag at his feet. He withdrew a hand-sized stone lantern, its base cracked and moss-covered. Striking a match, he lit a small candle inside, and a soft, earthy scent drifted through the car like fresh mud after spring rain. He placed the lantern in the aisle separating them. Tired and frayed, lost, unable to find your way, he murmured, his tone almost tender. It's so easy to drown when the world moves so fast around you. You'd cling to anything you could find. Learn to control your mindset and let the best of you to the forefront. Yuki's eyes darted from the lantern to the head of the car. She didn't know whether to scream or cry. You want to go home, but so does another. He reached out his hand. Stand up. Bae, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yuki's shadow crawled up the ceiling as the train sailed through another intersection. The lantern cast him in a warm, earthy glow. Because you are lost and drowning, Hana. He hesitated, the warmth of the lantern tugging her forward. Trembling, Yuki slipped her hand into his, feeling the roughness of his skin pull her up. His grip was firm, solid, grounding. She felt a tug, and her arms felt heavy, but she pulled herself to her feet. The old man guided her gently around the lantern, and with a swift, deliberate movement, he pressed a thin paper lined with Japanese calligraphy onto the floor beneath her seat. Turning, Yuki gasped and stumbled backward to find her shadow writhing and coiling, pinned to her seat by the soft glow of the lantern. It lunged to grasp at the row of chairs ahead of it to strike a wall, then recoiled like a snake to shoot upward. It struggled like a creature caught in a net, pushing against an invisible barrier, distorting and smearing as it pressed against the overhead compartment. He crouched to adjust the lantern. "Oh, Fuda," he said, holding up another slip of paper. His tone was matter-of-fact, as though this were an everyday occurrence. He gestured to the seat. "That yokai's been riding with you for weeks now, I suspect, feeding off your weariness, your sadness." Her mouth went dry. "Could you not smell it? Feel it clinging to you, draining you?" He grunted and then rubbed his jaw. "Kids," Yuki managed a shaky breath. You're an onomyoji, an exorcist?" "Yes, that is my father, an exorcist. Perhaps in an older time." He smiled toothlessly. "Today, I'm just an old man with a good lantern." She watched, spellbound, as he moved the lantern closer to her seat. Her shadow twisted and shrank, retreating from the light, trying to squeeze itself like a giant spider into the tiny crevice between the seat and the wall. "Sit up front," he instructed. "Take the lantern, keep it by your bed and let it burn. It will keep you company on nights that feel too dark." Still trembling, Yuki bowed her head in gratitude. "My name, it's Yuki." End of. The old man chuckled, his eyes crinkling warmly. "Takeshi," he said simply, nodding. He glanced at the shadow. "Go now, Yuki. I will see her home." With the lantern clutched close, Yuki moved toward the forward cabin, her heart still hammering. The earthy scent wrapped around her like a blanket as she slid into a seat. A strange peace settled over her as she sat in the lantern's glow. The weight on her shoulders felt light for the first time in weeks. Without thinking, she opened her phone and texted, "Aiko?" Breathing deeply, feeling the lantern's warmth. The flicker of an old, steadfast light amidst the endless night guiding her way. Shamala and Kanaka were traveling through the vast featurelessness of central India.
when Alex noticed a dark shape. The clock on the dashboard of the car said 11:26, but Yamala was driving at a furious speed to reach the next pit stop before they could continue their journey to reach their ancestral home in Agra. In motion, visualizing the various types of contact grips exposed to the court, pressure, stress, and the interactions with his wife, pain, grief, and aching tendencies. Shamelaw was annoyed after 2 hours of high-beam lights shining in his eyes from the oncoming cars, as well from cars behind him in the rearview mirrors. High beams should be banned, but now there was no such disturbance. There was no car for miles in both directions. The road was flat and straight, and the vast desolation on either side of the road sent a chill down Shamalal's spine. There were sparse bobble trees lining the road, but not much else. It was getting cold, it was getting windy, and the scrawny trees were swaying in the moonlight. Shamala wondered if Kanaka was also feeling the same unease that made her so quiet. She was never this quiet. Maybe it was the landscape that was making her morose. Or maybe it was her impending marriage to a distant and unattractive relative in Agra, which was doing the trick. In any other scenario, Shamalal would have been thankful for the silence. But on this road, on this windy, starless night, on this expanse of nothingness and darkness, he wanted the chattering. But Shaman wouldn't admit to something so simple. As far as he was concerned, his sister was dumb and didn't listen to his advice, and should not resist getting a good deal in marriage. What else was there for girls like her to do? It's not like she is some MBA with a high-flying job offer. She had recently graduated from Kirorimal College with a measly 45% grade. Who was going to give her a job? Of all things, she had graduated in botany. He had asked her to do accounts, but she wanted to study trees. So, she said, it was literally the stupidest major you could select if you were not in research. His sister was dumb, and it was best if she got married to that pimpled fool Hitesh, and they both continued their witless existence out of his hair. I know what you are thinking, Kanaka said in a humorless drone voice. You think I am doing the right thing for my sister, but you are an idiot. Her voice sliced through the silence of the night. The "you are an idiot" part was nothing new. They always called each other that. It carried no meaning other than the comfort of familiarity. Maybe part of the same thing, she said. Look who's talking, Shamlal said in a voice devoid of any warmth. He hated his sister. She considered herself some new age free spirit artist after wasting his hard-earned money on doing a botany major of all. Meanwhile, he was stuck on a job where he couldn't progress because he lacked a college degree. He should have put that money on himself instead of wasting it on her. Whatever was good and familiar in his heart for her was smothered by this sticky, prickly resentment which covered everything. It's the truth. You don't know what's good for you, he said for the lack of something better to say. He looked out and saw the trees had possibly blotted out the sky. The moon was no longer shining, and stars were hidden by a dense layer of clouds, and the tall trees were swaying in the mighty wind. And there was no light anywhere other than his headlights. He was a very fearless kind of a guy and would never hesitate in any situation. But the mere thought of stopping here gave him an ungodly terror. Something nasty burdened his heart. It felt strange, as if the air was thick with something nasty. Chez Noir couldn't help but feel that they had passed through a portal somewhere and were now in an alternative world where everything was weird. The darkness was overpowering. There was nothing for miles, and there was nothing above or below other than the road illuminated by his car's sad headlight. If not for that, they might as well be in space. He looked at her. Her feet were on the dashboard and she was chewing gum incessantly. But a slight change in her demeanor was apparent. She was not so relaxed now. Even she felt it. He looked ahead and there was nothing, but at any moment something might emerge from the swirling dust on the road and eat them alive. How long they were stuck like this, there was no telling. The only thing that told the passage of time was his increasing dread and Kanaka's decreasing nonchalance. A point of light in the distance appeared. He was shocked and then relieved. Was their ordeal already over? He was then relieved. Maybe it was some tea shop. They would stop there and shake off their blues with some hot tea and some new faces, other than each other. They would tell the shop owner of their brief scare, who would then nod along sagely, stating that yes, indeed, the road was scary. Just as he was self-soothing with such imagery, he knew that nothing like that was going to happen. The closer he got to the point of light, which now started showing shape, he realized something was incorrect. It looked too bright for a Chaithela. It looked like a fallen star. He continued to drive, blocking out the unease in his heart, which had just picked up the pace a little. When he started to get closer, the atmosphere itself changed a little. It became lighter. He couldn't make out any colors. It was like a fairy tale. This place would look colorless, even in the light of the day. That thought, which had come from the depth of his mind, had simply erupted without any precedence, and it didn't even surprise him. He just accepted it, like in a dream you would accept that you are about to get married to your long-dead history teacher. Yeah, my thought exactly, his sister said, suddenly sitting upright and looking sharp. Something was rotten in this place. They smelled it before they saw it, the stench of death. You remember Minnie developed an abscess in her broken leg, and the ants tried to eat her, his sister said in a small voice. It smells exactly like that. Oh, Minnie. His sister suddenly started crying, which was weird because Minnie was his cat, and she had not shed a single tear when Minnie died of the terrible abscess. Why was she crying in that horrible whining noise? Stop your crying, why are you crying? He yelled hysterically, feeling as if his heart was ready to burst out of his body, feeling as if he was in a time bubble and everything else was happening much faster than he could process. His own thoughts ran at breakneck speed, slamming into one another. "Kanu, what's happening?" he said, breathing hard and through his mouth. He saw his breath condense. It was only September. It never got that cold. His teeth started chattering. His sister continued to sob for the long-dead Minnie. Her sobs were horrible, terribly unbearable. He half wanted to comfort her and half wanted to strangle her. From the corner of his advertisement eyes, he saw thick black smoke in the endless fields of Madhya Pradesh. The smoke moved close to the ground in a manner that belied some sinister intelligence. He knew he had to outrun the smoke. He had to. He would die. They would die if the smoke touched them. The woman reached for him, grasping at the shelf with startled eyes. He saw the point of light from earlier grow and take the shape of a makeshift shed. The setup looked similar to the roadside vegetable sellers. But why are they selling vegetables here? Ethan asked after looking at the shed again. He lowered himself to the ground. Can't they see the smoke? What smoke? Jamalala whipped his head to see Kanu, if she was serious or if it was her idea of a sick joke. Her now dry eyes were set on the makeshift vegetable stand. "Surely they have tea," she said in a deadly calm voice. Shaimalal looked at the vegetable shed and slammed his brakes hard. He hadn't meant to stop, but it was his reaction when his brain was too overheated, overwhelmed. He saw mania. If mania could take a form, it would take the form of those beings carrying crates and crates of oranges. Like 7 oranges was written on the crates. And finally, Dionysus wondered aloud. The oranges were rotten. The beings were long and thin, with faces that were not faced at all. They had black holes for eyes and darkness in the mouths when their lips widened and parted, and 2 tiny black holes where the nose was supposed to be. The skin was paper white and wrinkled. Surely these beings were not alive. For they were. "I want oranges," his sister screamed in manic delight. He looked at her, and for a split second, he wanted to open the car, push her out, and speed away. Her eyes met with his, and he saw a flicker of fear and panic tide over her eyes, which was quickly replaced with unnatural mania. "Unchanges," she screamed, and her mouth split wide open in a hideous grin. He floored the car. The creatures were walking toward them. No. A hellish noise entered their car as his sister opened the window in an apparent attempt to grab one of those rotting oranges. It was the sound of 1,000,000 flies feasting on death. The sound, combined with the stench, was gagging Shaimalal, and he closed the windows with the control on his side. Not one fly should enter this car. His hand twitched to push Kanaka out of the car. It would feel so good. Good riddance, no marriage to prepare for, no dowry to give, no headache. And anyways, she had crossed over to the other side. She already wanted those oranges. He stood up and took one last look at her white face. His hand turned the prototype. It was like being spilt in 2. One part of him had taken control of his hand and was intent on pushing Kanaka to the approaching creatures, better her than me, and the other helpless one was screaming and crying. A sudden pothole made him jump, and his hands caught and tangled up in the tassels of a little dream catcher that was hanging over the car dashboard. Kanu had made it a long time ago. It was for him when he got the car for the first time 10 years ago. He never had the heart to throw it away. It was dirty and falling apart, but still, he had kept it. Stupid 11-year-old Kanu had said, "I have weaved a sacred thread in it that will always bind us." At that time, he had chalked it up to an anxious Kanu, worried about her increasingly distant brother going off to working 18-hour days. What was he doing? The spell of whatever was holding him hostage broke. The creatures were now close, and Kanu was trying to open the door. At this speed, if she fell out, she was sure to die. He heard the horrifying telltale sound of a door opening and grabbed hold of Kanaka's neck in noogie with one hand, and with the other, he closed the door. The creatures were still running and apparently laughing. Kanu closed her eyes and screamed. But this scream was familiar. It was their scream of Kanu when she was too scared to jump in the pool on the first day of her swimming classes. I hate oranges," she half-sobbed. "Me too." Shaimalal smiled wide and laughed. "Me too, Kanu." He floored the car to maximum capacity. They whizzed by and the orange stand disappeared from his rearview mirror, and it felt like someone had lifted a dead weight from his body. The whirring of the flies and the stench reduced, and he felt it in his bones that the point of maximum danger had passed. He looked back in the rearview mirror, and the creatures were running and jumping after the car, carrying oranges and laughing maniacally, making hooting noises. What? Don't you dare to slow down. We aren't stopping till we see a temple. Any temple, Kanaka said, uncharacteristically religious. The city iconically codenamed New Jersey. Well, it sounded like a good idea. Yes, temple it is, he breathed out. Willis nodded. To his surprise, he felt much lighter than before starting this journey from Hyderabad. He laughed. The stars and the moon were out and twinkling, and the atmosphere was warm again. Only the smell of heat-baked earth and the noise of the engine was there. Well, yay, good, Kanaka agreed. It was at dawn that they finally saw a temple, lonely and tiny. From far, they saw the saffron flag at the temple pinnacle and took a detour from the highway. They entered the temple premises and sat down. Both unsure of what to do, they simply closed their eyes, joining their palms in an offering of thanks. Baya, I don't know what happened, but I know you wanted to push me out. Jamalel exhaled loudly. He wanted to cry. He had no defense. I know you were not you and something had possessed you. When you touched me, I could finally feel the blackness in our souls. I had a glimpse in your mind. It was as if you and I were both trapped in our bodies, and a tempest of black smoke was swirling like a giant tornado, and we were helpless and blinded. We couldn't fight it. Jamalal opened his eyes to meet his sister. They were brown and crackled with a genuine smile. After so many years, he felt the long-forgotten flutter of fondness. He smiled. But we did. We fought it. Don't hate you, Shamal stuttered. He had forgotten that, Kanaka said, smiling beatifically. Then her smile became something goofy with raised eyebrows. She continued. So you won't be pissed if I run away on the day of my marriage. Jamalal laughed, and before long, Kanaka joined him. Of course, she could run away and have great adventures for however long she liked. Just don't come running to me for money, I said. Earlier, he would have asked her how would she support herself, but he had now seen in her soul. It was large and vibrant, and would die if put in the shackles of convention, said Patrick. Kanu attempted to tickle him, and they laughed on the ground till a sleepy priest shushed them. Clearly the priest wasn't going to take this squee.